I had owned the land for almost 15 years. It wasn't some sprawling estate or anything out of a dream, but it was mine. 25 acres of quiet, open property just beyond the city limits, an oasis of trees, fields, and a small creek running through the back half. I bought it after years of saving, working double shifts, and cutting every possible corner to afford a future that felt truly mine. It wasn't just property, it was potential. Maybe one day I'd build a home on it. Maybe I'd let it grow wild and undisturbed. What mattered most was that I had a little corner of the world to call my own. For the most part, I left it alone. I'd visit occasionally, sometimes just to walk the boundary and breathe. Other times I'd drive out there, sit in the bed of my truck with a thermos of coffee, and imagine what it might one day become. I paid the property taxes on time, kept the paperwork secure, and made sure no one messed with it. But I didn't build on it. I didn't fence it in or develop it because I liked the raw, open nature of it. Some folks thought I was foolish for sitting on land like that without doing anything. But to me, it was perfect in its stillness. Then, one morning I took a drive out there. It had been maybe 5 or 6 months since my last visit. Life had gotten busy, work had been stressful, and I'd been dealing with a few personal matters. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. Maybe some overgrown brush. Maybe a few fallen branches to clear. But as I approached the gravel path that used to lead toward the center of my property, my stomach dropped. There was no gravel path anymore. Instead, there was pavement. And not just a simple paved driveway, but an actual road. A wide, freshly paved entrance, complete with a faux stone guardhouse and a sign overhead that read, "Welcome to Maple Creek, a gated HOA community." I slammed on the brakes and pulled over. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely focus. I stepped out of my truck, walked past the now selling starting at $399,000 sign, and took in the impossible. Rows of homes, dozens of them some. Nearly finished, others still skeletal with scaffolding and workers crawling around like ants. Heavy machinery rumbled in the distance. Sod had been laid. Driveways poured. Streetlights installed. I thought I was in the wrong place. That maybe I had made a terrible mistake and somehow pulled into the wrong development. But as I followed the tree line, I saw the familiar bend in the creek, the same old oak tree I used to lean against, and the same rise in the earth near the back corner. This wasn't some accident. This was my land. My name was on the deed. I stood there frozen, watching construction workers move about like everything was normal. I tried to ask one of them what was going on, but he just shrugged and pointed toward the sales trailer. "Talk to Karen," he said. "She's the one in charge here." I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the nightmare. A nightmare where a woman named Karen, backed by an HOA I'd never heard of, had somehow built 98 homes on my property. Felt a storm of confusion, betrayal, and anger starting to form. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something much, much bigger. And I had no idea how deep it went. I didn't sleep that night. No. I kept pacing around my living room, replaying every second of what I saw that afternoon. The homes, the workers, the sign, none of it made sense. I pulled out my old file folder, the one with the original deed, tax receipts, and property map. Everything was still there, dated and legal. There hadn't been a single missed payment, no notices of sale, no foreclosures, no court orders. There was no reason for anyone else to be on that land, let alone building an entire neighborhood by sunrise. I had made up my mind I was going back. I needed answers, not rumors from a construction worker. I drove straight to the property heart, pounding harder with every mile. As I approached the paved entrance again, it was even more active than the day before. Trucks rolled in and out, hauling lumber and supplies. Workers moved like clockwork. It looked like a development in its final phase, like it had been going on 4 months, maybe a year. How had I not noticed? How had no one told me? I parked just outside the newly placed curb and marched up the drive. A young woman in a polo shirt and headset approached me with a bright smile. "Hi there, are you here for a tour?" she asked. "No," I said flatly. "I'm here because this is my land, and I want to know why there are houses on it." Smile flickered, but she kept her composure. "Oh, you'll want to talk to Karen. She's the HOA president. Her office is in the trailer near Lot 12. Lot 12? My land didn't have lots. That word made my blood boil. I followed the paved walkway until I reached the trailer she pointed to. A sleek, white modular office with a big sign that read Maple Creek Development Office by appointment only. Didn't bother knocking. Pushed the door open. Inside sat a woman in her 50s. Blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, perfectly ironed blouse, and an attitude that oozed entitlement before she even spoke a word. She looked up from her laptop and raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you?" I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, I own this land. I want to know what the hell's going on here." She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just folded her hands calmly on her desk. "This land," she said, motioning vaguely toward the window, "is part of a transfer to the Maple Creek HOA 6 months ago. Everything was filed legally with the county. If you're here to file a complaint, I suggest you take it up with the city planning department." I felt like the floor tilted under me. Transfer? What transfer? Never sold this land. I never signed anything. Karen gave a condescending chuckle. "Well, perhaps you should check your records. We have full development rights, and our plat was approved by the county. We've sold 34 of the units already." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip her desk over and demand to see the paperwork. But instead, I said, "Show me the documents. Now." She pulled out a file drawer and handed me a copy of a deed wand I had never seen before. It had my parcel number, my property, but someone else's name had signed it as the seller. A name that looked vaguely familiar, but not mine. "This is a fake," I said immediately. "You're entitled to your opinion," she replied coolly. "But the county doesn't think so." That moment I realized this was more than a mistake. This was theft, organized, deliberate, and covered up by forged documents and bureaucratic silence. I had no idea who Karen really was or what she was involved in, but I knew one thing. I was about to fight the biggest battle of my life, and I wasn't going to back down. I left that trailer with a photocopy of the forged deed in one hand, and fury pumping through my veins. Karen's smug expression was burned into my memory. That half smile she wore like armor, the way she dismissed my outrage with rehearsed legal jargon, it all made me sick. I wasn't just dealing with a mistake. I was dealing with someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She had power, money, and connections, and she thought I'd go away quietly. She was wrong. Over the next few days, I dove headfirst into research. I spent hours at the county recorder's office, flipping through property records, parcel transfers, and construction permits. The woman at the front desk recognized the development name and immediately stiffened when I mentioned it. "Maple Creek," she said cautiously. "You're not the first one to ask questions." That alone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an isolated case of confusion. Something was off, and people knew it. The deed Karen gave me had a signature that didn't match mine obviously. It looked like a rushed attempt to forge, using a name similar to mine, but with the first initial instead of the full name. The notary's stamp looked legitimate, but when I tracked down the notary listed, she told me she had never seen the document before in her life. Her seal had been copied without her knowledge. Fraud, plain and simple. I went back to the trailer. The next morning, determined to confront Karen again, not because I thought she'd confess, but because I wanted her to know I wasn't going away. She greeted me with that same fake politeness, her eyes cold and calculating. "I spoke to the notary on this deed," I told her as I dropped the copy on her desk. "She says it's a fake." Karen didn't even glance at it. "If you have a legal claim, feel free to pursue it," she said. "But I'd advise you to tread carefully. You're trespassing on HOA property now. HOA property?" She said it like it was divine law. Like the 3 letters HOA gave her the right to play queen over everything they touched. She stood and walked around the desk, arms crossed like a school principal scolding a student. The truth is, this land was undeveloped, unused, and unmaintained for years. It was an eyesore. Our community has brought value to the area, created homes for dozens of families, and increased the tax base. You standing here screaming about? Signatures won't change that. You stole this land, I snapped. You built on it knowing it didn't belong to you. And you're going to answer for it. For the first time, her face changed. Just for a second. Something flickered behind her eyes, fear, maybe, or calculation. Then she smiled slowly. Then I suppose I'll see you in court. And with that, she turned her back on me. The meeting was over, but I wasn't leaving empty-handed. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed something strange. One of the homes under construction had a large banner in front of it. Phase 2, coming soon. 140 additional homes. My stomach twisted. They weren't done. They were planning to take even more, possibly beyond my lot, into neighboring properties. This wasn't just Karen overstepping. This was an organized land grab backed by silence, greed, and manipulated paperwork. I drove home that evening knowing the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. Karen had insulated herself behind the HOA, behind the contractors, and possibly even behind crooked officials. But I had something she didn't, the truth and the real title deed to prove it. I called a real estate attorney that night. I was going to war. The attorney I hired, Mitchell Grant, was one of those calm, serious types who didn't get rattled. Easily a former prosecutor with a strong jaw and a reputation for uncovering buried deals. I walked into his office with my folder of documents, and after an hour of going through them, he looked up and said exactly what I hoped to hear. You've got a solid case. What they did isn't just wrong, it's criminal. That validation was the first real relief I'd felt since discovering the homes on my land. Mitchell wasted no time. He filed a formal claim with the county, notified the city's planning commission, and submitted a demand for a cease and desist order on any further construction. But that was only the beginning. The deeper we dug, the more disturbing things we found. First, there was the forged deed. A fake seller, a fake notary entry, and an approval trail that led straight to a single name on the city's planning board, Russell Henson. He'd signed off on the Maple Creek development application, pushed it through zoning with minimal scrutiny, and overridden a protest filed months prior by a neighbor whose land had mysteriously shifted boundary lines. It was all linked. Russell, it turned out, had close ties to Karen. Public records showed that Karen's husband, a real estate developer who officially retired 3 years ago, was partnered on 3 projects with Russell's brother-in-law. A cozy little triangle of backdoor handshakes and no-bid contracts. The Maple Creek development was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated heist. And I was one of many victims they just didn't think anyone would fight back. Mitchell filed a civil lawsuit against Karen, the HOA board, and the city planner's office. We also filed for an emergency injunction to stop all construction. That same week, I was served a counterclaim from the HOA alleging harassment, interference with development, and defamation. Karen wasn't just playing defense. She was trying to bury me in legal fees. The stress was relentless. Every day brought new motions, depositions, and paperwork. I was drained, financially and emotionally. But I wasn't alone. As news of the lawsuit spread, others began reaching out. A retired couple who said a slice of their adjacent field had been paved over without notice. A rancher who claimed his fence line had been moved overnight. Even a construction worker who quit after realizing they were building on what he believed was disputed land. With Mitchell's guidance, we compiled these testimonies into a broader legal strategy. What started as my personal case was beginning to expose a systematic scheme of fraud, collusion, and illegal development. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down. She used HOA funds to fund her legal defense and started spinning a story to the local media claiming I was a disgruntled landowner who refused to sell and was now trying to sabotage a thriving community. The headline in one local paper read, "Lone man tries to shut down 98 homes. Who really owns the land?" Public opinion split overnight. Some people called me a hero. Others called me a nuisance. But the court wasn't swayed by PR campaigns. The evidence was piling up, and even Russell was starting to sweat. An internal city audit was launched, and under pressure he suddenly went on extended leave. Karen, for the first time, looked less untouchable. She still held her head high, still smiled that tight, smug smile, but you could see the cracks forming. We were headed for a showdown in court. Everything was riding on it. my land, my reputation, and now the rights of several others Karen had stepped on along the way. It wasn't just about property anymore. It was about justice. I was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was packed the morning the trial began. Media vans were parked outside, local reporters scribbling notes, and neighbors whispering in the back rows. Everyone in town had heard about the case by now. Some were just curious. Others came out of loyalty either to me or to the community Karen had falsely built. The tension was thick, but I sat still, hands clenched together, eyes fixed forward. I had waited nearly a year for this moment. Karen entered with her usual air of superiority, flanked by her legal team and 2 board members from the HOA. She looked polished, confident, and utterly unbothered. But I could see the shift, her posture a little more rigid, her eyes not quite meeting anyone else's. She knew the evidence was stacked against her, but she was betting on her lawyers, her influence, and maybe still counting on the court to favor the appearance of stability over truth. Mitchell began by laying out everything: the forged deed. The notary who had testified her stamp had been copied. The missing paperwork trail at City Hall, and the web of connections between Karen, her husband, and the disgraced city planner. He painted a crystal-clear picture of calculated fraud and manipulation. Witness after witness was called: surveyors, real estate agents, former HOA employees. Even the construction worker who'd quit halfway through gave a damning account of what he'd seen on site. Karen's team tried to poke holes. They argued the doctrine of adverse possession, claimed the land had been abandoned, and called my actions delayed and opportunistic. They leaned hard into the appearance of Progress 98 homes, 34 families already moved in, millions invested. They begged the court not to undo what had become a thriving part of the community. But the judge wasn't buying it. The turning point came when the county recorder testified. Under oath, he admitted that several files linked to Maple Creek had been flagged as irregular during an internal audit. One document had clearly been altered digitally, and the original record was missing from the physical archive. That was the nail in the coffin. When the judge gave his ruling, the room went completely silent. He declared the development illegal, the deed forged, and the construction trespassing on privately owned land. The 98 homes, regardless of how far along or how many had been sold, had been built without lawful authorization. The court ordered an immediate halt to any further development and mandated a full investigation into everyone involved: Karen, the city planner's office, and the developers who had partnered with them. Karen's face went pale. For the first time, she looked small. After the verdict, a wave of chaos followed. Buyers who had purchased homes in good faith were furious. Some threatened lawsuits of their own. The HOA dissolved within weeks. Karen was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and filing false legal documents. Her husband was implicated in a parallel case involving financial misconduct and was stripped of his license. I returned to my land a month later. It was quiet again, but not in the peaceful way it had been years ago. Half-built homes stood like ghosts, empty shells of someone else's dream, now turned into monuments of greed and lies. It would take time, money, and work to restore the land. Part of me wondered if I even wanted to anymore. The innocence I once associated with it was gone, but I had one. It's not just for myself, but for every landowner who thought they didn't have a voice. The fight had taken everything out of me, but it taught me something that would never leave me. Ever let your silence be mistaken for surrender. And never underestimate how far someone will go when they think no one is watching.